Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Asia Society, and welcome to our first arts and cultural event of the year. My name is Philip Ivanov. I'm the CEO of Asia Society in Australia. We're delighted to partner with VisAsia Council and the Art Gallery of New South Wales for today's event. They are a good partner for many years, and we're delighted to really open our season of 2021 with this partnership program. Let me begin by wishing you a happy Lunar New Year, and of course to all our listeners and speakers. And I hope this year, the year of the ox, will run more smoothly than the year of the rat in 2020. Before we begin, Asia Society acknowledges that many participants in today's event are dialing in from locations that have traditional owners and custodians. Today I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, from Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri People's Land of the Kulin Nation. I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to welcome and acknowledge any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people joining our webcast today. For those of you joining us for the first time, Asia Society is a global non-profit organization. We've been around for over 60 years globally and over 20 years in Australia. We have 13 centers across 4 continents. And really our mission is quite simple. It's about building bridges of understanding between Asia, Australia and the United States across the areas of business, policy, education and the arts. And Asia Society in Australia is a leading national centre for engagement with Asia, with presence in Melbourne and in Sydney, and with a national mandate to promote better understanding of the region and more deeper engagement with Asia. So today's program is a part of our set of events on cultural diplomacy. As we all know, in 2020, amidst the disruptions of COVID-19 and the distractions of the US elections, the Australia-China bilateral relationship has hit new lows. Today, we'll look at how art and cultural exchanges can be activated during these difficult times for the relationship, and can arts and culture help our economic and policy diplomacy with China. And we will hear from our panel of experts about the value and agency of art and culture in navigating diplomatic tensions. Before we introduce you to those experts, let me quickly go through today's proceedings. We'll have a 35-minute panel discussion, and we'll then move to questions from the audience. Please submit your questions through the comment section, and we'll do our best to answer all of them. It's now my pleasure to introduce my co-host and our moderator. Geoff Raby, AO, is with us today as the chairman of VisAsia Council. He was previously Australia's ambassador to China from 2007 to 2011. After 27 years in public service, he resigned to establish Geoff Raby and Associates in 2011, a Beijing-based strategic advisory company. He currently serves as an independent non-executive director of ASX-listed companies, Yin Cao, OceanaGold, and Netlinks. He is the chair of the Murdoch University's Vice Chancellor's Advisory Board, Western Sydney University Australia-China Institute of Arts and Culture, and of course, VisAsia Council at the Gallery of New South Wales. He is a member of the board of the Gavin Foundation as well. In 2019, his donation of his personal collection of Chinese contemporary art was La Trobe University's biggest gift of cultural philanthropy. So Geoff's got a unique set of experiences and skills in diplomacy and art, and so is really best placed to start the conversation and lead it today. So a real honor to have him moderate today's discussion. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us, and over to you, Geoff.
Philip, thank you very, very much. And I'm delighted to be here with this participating Asia Society, VisAsia public discussion on culture and diplomacy. Hugely important subject. Never been more important when you look at the state of the Australia-China bilateral relationship, where essentially all high-level diplomatic contact is frozen. And so there is an enormous space for cultural diplomacy to fill. Cultural diplomacy is a very old concept, and it certainly covers all aspects of the art and of the arts, and it focuses very, very much on people-to-people links. And this is extremely important because it helps to address stereotypes that people build up about other peoples. It helps to break down the notion of the other, and hopefully brings people closer on an understanding based on people who see each other not through stereotype prisms, but as ordinary people doing interesting and creative things and opening themselves to each other. These days, cultural diplomacy is often wrapped up in the concept of soft power, and soft power is distinguished from hard power, which is largely military power, or sharp power is another emerging concept where states interfere through other means in trying to shape policies of another state in their favor. But soft power really is positioning a state in a way that people feel that they wish to emulate that state or feel close to that state or are attracted by it. And that attractiveness is really projected through things like culture and cultural activities. China is a obviously challenging place in so many ways, of course, but even in the area of cultural diplomacy, because you have on the Chinese side, a very, very rich, deep cultural traditions across the whole range of calligraphy, art, poetry, music, food, and so on. And it's very, very powerful and very seductive. But you also have an official Chinese culture that's projected to the world, which largely is filtered through the ideological prism and political necessity of the Chinese Communist Party. And between that space, there has been a tremendously important field emerge, which is the one I've been very interested in personally, is Chinese contemporary art. From the Australian side, the challenge in projecting our soft power, if you like, into China through cultural diplomacy, very much is partly because of this great scale of China and our own capacity to reach out to this huge country of great cultural density and richness is limited by our size and our capacity. So we have to be very, very targeted and approach this in a very strategic way. Just a couple of examples before I introduce our speakers. When I first went to Beijing as ambassador in 2007, there was very much a strong view, not only in China, but elsewhere, that Australia was very much a mouthpiece, if you like, of the United States, and that there wasn't really an appreciation of Australia's authentic, original, and independent voice. And to deal with that, I instigated and instituted the Australian Writers' Week, which I'm pleased to see as an annual event is still being held. And that was really to provide an opportunity to lift the profile of Australian writing and to show our Chinese friends and let them access Australia's authentic voice. And then in 2010, and this underscores the challenges for Australia, we had a year of Australian culture in China, and it was launched and initiated with great intention and goodwill, but was woefully underfunded. I think we had like $1 million to spend. If you look at the French or the Germans or the British when they did cultural events, or the Spanish, there would be many, 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 many more times that. So one of the struggles we had was to work out how to divvy up the money. And of course, in Australia, the tendency often is to go for the big productions. So Sydney Orchestra, the Australian Ballet or whatever, one of those shows alone would gobble up most of the funds available. So instead, I put together a group of Australia-Chinese cultural participants at that time, including Guan Wei, who's on the panel with us today. And we decided not to fund big activities like that but to try and work out how we could use cultural events and the involvement of Australian artists in China. And when I say artists, across the whole range of arts, from visual arts to music and so on, to build longer term collaborative arrangements. And I think that helped to increase our reach and hopefully laid the seed for future collaborative work, which it did in a number of cases, well into the future. So like everything when we deal with China, it's an asymmetrical relationship. And that's not to diminish Australia, it's basically just point out the reality that China is a vastly bigger, more ancient in terms of its current culture than Australia, recognizing, of course, the great depth and length of Australian Aboriginal culture. And yet cultural diplomacy is critically important. And as I said at the outset of my remarks, no more is cultural diplomacy as important as it is now. At no other time has it been so important, when essentially our official relationships are frozen. So I hope that helps to set something of the scene for our discussions. And it's with enormous pleasure and gratitude that I would like to welcome and introduce our panelists, our participants. Distinguished Professor Ien Ang is Professor of Cultural Studies and was the founding director of the Institute for Culture and Society. She is one of the leaders in cultural studies worldwide, with interdisciplinary work focusing on cultural globalization, migration, and multiculturalism. Yin Cao is curator of Chinese art at the Art Gallery of New South Wales and one of my colleagues there at the gallery. She was previously assistant director of the Arthur M. Sackler Museum of Art and Archaeology at Peking University, Beida, and a researcher at the University Museum of the National University of Singapore. Yin is trained as an archaeologist at Peking University and Harvard University. Our third speaker today, who I've just mentioned, is my very old friend, Guan Wei. Guan Wei is a China-born artist who now lives and works in both Beijing and Sydney. His works explore his cultural heritage and many influences of the West. Working across painting, sculpture, and site-specific installation, his reflections upon the human condition engage with critical contemporary issues, including climate change, questions of identity, migration, and exile, all issues of tremendous contemporary relevance and importance. Now, I was about to hand over and leave. Oh, Ian, you're back. You were about to get the first question when you ran away. So I had a moment of terror, but you're back with us. So can I throw the first question to you, Ian, please? Professor Ang, how do you view cultural diplomacy and how do you see it play out within the Australia-China relationship?
Thank you, Geoff, and thank you for having me at this panel. Yes, you've already said a lot about cultural diplomacy, Geoff, and you have been one of the perhaps practitioners of that from the point of view of Australia in relation to China. What I would suggest in terms of cultural diplomacy in a broader sense or in a more general sense is you know, the tension that exists between culture and diplomacy. So a lot of people talk about cultural diplomacy today, and states are investing in it more and more. But the meaning of it is quite ambiguous. And in a very general sense, we could say that cultural diplomacy proper is generally driven and funded by governments and conducted with some idea of the national interest in mind. And the national interest can be defined in different ways, whether it's national security or national promotion or building mutual trust and so on. And of course, this in relation to, for example, Australia and China, this goes in both directions. So at the Australian end, we have had the recent creation within DFAT of the National Foundation of Australia-China Relations, which has replaced the former Australia-China Council. And this is just recent, so we don't quite know yet what this organization, this foundation is going to do in the coming years. But according to its website, the aim of the foundation is, and this is a very standard formulation, strengthening understanding and engagement between Australia and China, and between the nations and between the peoples of Australia and China by giving out grants and so on. And cultural diplomacy is just a part of that, alongside other forms of public diplomacy, such as science diplomacy, sports diplomacy, and so on. And in terms of Australia-China cultural exchange, we've had quite a lot of that over the years, but examples are exhibitions of the terracotta warriors at the National Gallery of Victoria, or in the other direction, the Buckmasters artworks of Central Australia at the National Museum of China. Now, from the Chinese side, well, China has invested hugely in its cultural diplomacy worldwide, including Australia. Really, it has ramped up its cultural diplomacy enormously with the Confucius Institutes, for example, but also the development of China cultural centers. We have one here in the Sydney CBD, which was established in 2014 and funded by the PRC government. And this center has an art gallery, a multifunction hall, a library, and classrooms, and it holds many events related to Chinese art and culture. And here too, we can read on the website the official aim of this center is to enhance mutual understanding between the two nations and promoting the friendships between the Chinese and Australian people. So here again, this mutual understanding is the explicit objective. And really, you could say that with all cultural diplomacy, the overall rationale is, in this case, to promote China's standing and reputation in the world. Now, these are examples of what I would call official cultural diplomacy, but there is a lot of cultural exchange really that happens through two-way flow between the countries, which isn't really related with diplomacy proper, which is funded by governments and kind of instigated by governments. So, you know, grassroots cultural organizations and artists have a lot of intercultural connections. And I would suggest that a lot of these more grassroots exchanges can be much more diverse, much more exploratory, and not really motivated by some kind of national interest objective in the narrow sense. And I would suggest that these kinds of perhaps small scale activities are just as important, if not more, than the ones that are very much developed under the banner of official cultural diplomacy. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. It's very, very interesting introduction. I think a couple of points you make that really stand out is the importance of cultural diplomacy to building trust, mutual trust, and from that follows mutual understanding, which you've also discussed, and also I think a very significant distinction, particularly in the current situation, between formal institutional structures and arrangements or official cultural diplomacy, as you said, and the massive unofficial activity that's taking us forward. And really, this year has been, a lot of 2020 and up until now has been so unusual with the pandemic, because so much of that activity, I think, that would normally happen has been affected adversely by the pandemic's limit on people traveling and moving. And that's another question I think we need to address at some point. If we don't get the success with the vaccines that we would hope, how do we take forward the informal aspects of cultural diplomacy if people can't freely travel? I'll leave that for a later consideration, but nothing, even these wonderful Zoom broadcasts don't substitute for close personal interaction. But that segues well into my next question, which is for Yin Cao. And that's really, I guess, looking at the more, we'll put the pandemic effects to one side, but to what extent has the freeze on bilateral official relationships played in and affected the ability for Australian cultural institutions and Chinese institutions to interact and work together? To what extent has there been spillover into the official cultural area from the very severe difficulties we currently have in the bilateral relationship between Australia and China? Yin Cao?
Yes. Hi, hi Geoff. Hi everyone. First, I want to say 新年快乐, Happy New Year. Today is the first year, and thank you, VisAsia and Asia Society for inviting me to be on this panel. But I have to say, I mean, I can actually answer it very simple. These actually, the tension, I mean, of diplomacy, to be honest, I personally and my gallery hasn't actually been affected, because thanks for the last maybe 4 decades of the very good relationship between Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Chinese cultural institutions, like thanks for Edmund Capon and Dr. Michael Brandt, and they've always said like art, as the core of the relationship with with China, and then we have developed a really sound foundation for a long-term, exchange program. So in the past year, I've been approached both officially and personally by my colleagues on both sides to actually continue the cultural exchange exhibition. I just want to give you an example. Early, the Art Gallery of New South Wales and Palace Museum in Beijing have started to have this relationship since 90s. We had exhibitions, we had the scholars exchange, and there was a plan sponsored by Bank of China for Art Gallery to organize a delegation to visit the Palace Museum early last year. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we could not do that. But instead, we didn't let that stop us. So we actually engaged continually with the Palace Museum to have online exchange. The plan was to have a conservation exchange. So we actually communicated very openly with the Palace Museum's, they call it the Relic Hospital, which is the cultural conservation department, which has the state of art of conservation in the whole world. So we were planning to send one of our senior conservators to Palace Museum to stay there for 1 month to learn how to conserve lacquerware and textile. But because he couldn't do that, but we actually managed to have exchange sessions with the experts at Palace Museum to discuss the 2 important pieces in our collection, to how to conserve them, prepare them for our upcoming exhibition. So I think, as I said, this tension, or it's probably less than the pandemic itself that affected our exchange. So I just have to, and also we've been approached by the Hong Kong Palace Museum, for the future collaborations, and so I feel very lucky, but I just feel I have to be, as I said, be very thankful for my predecessors to set this very strong background, a foundation. And I hope, this is going to be the case. I'm very confident we can continue the dialogue with our peers in China, and then to probably one pandemic, it comes to an end, we can start to organize, all sorts of cultural activities, exhibition exchanges, academic exchanges, all that. Thank you.
Thanks, Yin Cao. That's very encouraging hear that. I think you hear something similar amongst the business community by and large as well. I mean, everyone's got to factor the impact of COVID-19, but one senses that a lot of engagement still is open despite what's happening in the relationship, and so that's very helpful. And of course, it's going to be an important building block going forward. Guan Wei, your art has a lot of humour, and it is obviously, though, created to make people think about some very important issues, including imperialism, colonialism, migration, refugees, all major issues of the day. So how do you combine, a celebration and vibrancy with satire to influence and educate people through your art? You're on mute, Guan Wei. You're on mute. Mute. Go off mute, Guan Wei, please.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. Hello, technology just.
Yeah, now it's okay. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. And I think I feel very interesting, and because artists always behind the screens, but today is like me going to on the stage, give talking, and I feel interesting, and because situations in China, Australia now is quite cold and freezing, and but for the art and I think it's quite a little bit different. Geoff just mentioned before, like 2010 and 2011, and when I was in Beijing working with Geoff, organized some this Australian China culture years. We organized some big exhibitions. But it's through the government and officers, some things. But recently, I feel it's interesting things is people-to-people exchange cultures. This is quite busy. For example, recently, I organized one the exhibitions called Pressure Treasures. It's Wallaby Councils, and this very successful exhibition. And 200 people, joined the openings. And last year also, I was the Cultural Powerhouse Museum and organized the Pose of the Dragon. This is another Chinese contemporary show, including the 5 Mainland China artists and the 5 Australian Chinese artists. And now I'm doing the commission for the Hurstville Councils. I feel before, the high levels, like the State Gallery and but now we, doing something like regional galleries and also some commercial galleries. And later this year also we have some other plans, and also myself has 2 solo shows, and also at the moment I have 3 solo shows, both one in Beijing, one in Shenzhen, also another one in Brisbane. And for myself, this is not very cold, for the maybe government levels, they some the problem or something, but for the people, to people, the exchange is, I think, quite busy. Also for the many Chinese artists in the communities in Sydney, Melbourne, and somewhere. Also the many things happen. Sometimes like me to curate or something, and I support to them to some things. And I think the situations in the people, the labels is quite different. The government, the situations, and this is my opinions. And for myself, and always concerned about the like refugees, migrations, and history both of China and Australians, and also for identification for myself or some things. And I'm very, very busy, and also try my best, do a lot of the work and exhibitions. And I think it's to build up the use my artwork, for the two countries, they know each other or some things. And I think this the culture is very art is very important. Can be like remissions, for the relationship, for the people, something like this. Okay, thank you, Geoff.
Thanks, Guan Wei. Just for a minute, I'd like to drill a bit more into your own work and how you seek to influence people through your work. And as you were speaking, I was reminded, as you recall, one of the a piece I bought from you, Diptych, from 2007, from the Day After Tomorrow exhibition, which I found incredibly moving and powerful for me, because we were coming off the back of the early debates over immigration and refugees from the early years of last decade, and did this extraordinary painting of with the classic Guan Wei figures adrift and lost in a boat in the waters, and your classic Aboriginal figures observing these pinkish bodies, which are clearly Europeans, cast adrift on the shores of what was a metaphorical Australia. I mean, for me, to see you, who came to Australia as an immigrant, reflecting images back to Australians like that, was really very, very powerful. And do you intend to do that mainly through your work?
I think yes. Since I came to Australia in 1989, now I've been living in Australia for 30 years, and quite like the Australians. And also, I think Australian environmental and the cultures, and gave me a very strong influence. I always thinking, Australia like a big island, surrounding is full of the waters, and I'm interested in the history and like Aboriginal cultures and colonial cultures, and also the multicultural, in the mix in the Australians. And that's why, I always thinking how the people, came from another country to Australia for the livings. And also I'm quite interesting about geography and the histories. And, and that's why I organized the images, in my pictures. And I hopefully still keep the humors and the beauties. And also after the humor, and also they have some knowledge, like people to thinking how, for the living Australians, and also how they have some the philosophy behind or something. And because I like creative my art, like some story behind, also has some narrative in there. And when the people look in my pictures, they feel it's a beauty and the humor, but behind this, they have some ideas, because they have some story behind this. I think for the art, they not like a political something. The art, when you give you the feelings, they can give you very strong feeling, and also can be going too deep to your heart or something. I think this is very important for the art, I think.
Thanks, Guan. That's terrific. Professor Ang, about 10 years ago, Henry Kissinger, in his book, Henry Kissinger, the Arch Realist, in his book on global order, said that to be a great power, you have to have more than military weight and economic strength. You have to have legitimacy, and the legitimacy comes partly, I think, through culture. I think, would you agree that this is a challenge for China, that is struggling with its soft power, to project soft power, and what are the limits on China influencing others and building that legitimacy through its soft power?
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, I really have big problems with this idea of soft power and the way in which cultural diplomacy tends to be conflated with soft power. And I think too much then is instrumentalized in terms of culture. So I think cultural diplomacy can be limited precisely if culture is instrumentalized by notions of the national interest or the notion of we have to develop our soft power, because in a situation like that, culture is used in a competitive sense rather than in terms of developing cooperation and mutual understanding and so forth. And well, you know, soft power is also often used for ideas of nation branding, for example, and both China and Australia are involved in doing this. And all of that has nothing to do with developing mutual understanding, in my view, but very much in terms of international competition. And perhaps that's also in terms of international legitimacy, as you're mentioning Kissinger. In kind of a more progressive cultural diplomacy really is, I think, the kind of work that Guan Wei has been doing in the past decades in Australia, where it is much more about the people-to-people exchange, often sometimes quite small scale, but it's a very local, involving in Australia anyway, the huge kind of cohort of Chinese Australians that we have here, very dynamic, very hybrid, very mutually cross-fertilizing. That's the kind of cultural exchange that I think will improve China-Australia relations and not the soft power kind of competition stuff. So I think we have to be careful with that notion of soft power. And certainly I think China being so serious about investing in its soft power, sometimes it actually, that they fail with that because they are so heavy-handed with it. So that's a problem.
That's a very, very important distinction you've just drawn between soft power and cultural diplomacy, and I think that's something. I think you've got a good book in that. And speaking of books, I should say that in my new book, there's a chapter on China's soft power, and it's quite controversial because I came down very much on the position that you've just articulated, that if anything, China's state-sponsored effort at soft power has been largely counterproductive. Yin Cao, as an archaeologist, I couldn't think of anyone better than to direct the next question to, and that's about cultural appropriation and the extent that impedes and limits cultural exchange, and going back very much to Professor Ang's original proposition that cultural diplomacy is all about building mutual trust and therefore understanding. But cultural appropriation does seem to be a contentious issue in this area. Do you have some comments, particularly from your perspective as an archaeologist?
Actually, I haven't done a lot of research on this, and it's such a big question. I can only speak to my own experience, because, as I said, as an archaeologist, I my own, last 10 years at Art Gallery of New South Wales is introducing historical art to bring exhibitions of historical art into Art Gallery of New South Wales. But when I approach, my exhibitions or curate my exhibition, I've never thought of, that big issues of soft power. Or for me, I'm very, as I said again, very supported by the gallery. when I came on the scene to this job, I reviewed our exhibition programs with China, and I identified that there is a need for broadening our program to introduce more varieties of Chinese history. Because I think it must be a cliche. China has 5,000 history or that. And when I look at the programs, and most of our exhibition were concentrated on the pre-Tang dynasty. So I actually proposed to the gallery, I think I'd like to have a more systematic kind of program in place, so I suggested, to do post, around Northern Dynasty, Southern Dynasty, and then Tang Dynasty, so I'm trying to build up this, program that can broadening Australia's audience or viewers, knowledge of China, So I don't think, as I said, for me, I've never thought of this word of soft power. I just feel like my own passion is, I'm sure, everybody can learn from the Chinese old wisdoms, and also, for example, the exhibition I introduced, for Heaven and Earth in 2019, which is sponsored by VisAsia. I just think, we should go as cultural, people who work in this cultural exchanges should go over the politics or diplomacy, because governments can change, politics changes, but culture is there, especially for Chinese culture there. And it's a lot of wisdoms, a lot of lessons, experience we can learn, So that's why for the exhibition Heaven and the Earth, I introduced the philosophy of the 天人合一, the being harmony. What is the most urgent thing for our human race? It's the destruction of the nature. But for Chinese culture, it's, to treasure, the culture, to respect the nature. So I think for me, as I said, with the support of the gallery, we always think what is important, the issues, art. As I think Malcolm Fraser, on the return of the terracotta exhibition in 1983, he made a comment just that the cultural exchange playing an important role in furthering knowledge and understanding between two countries like Australia and China of such diverse origins of cultural traditions. So I think, I'm sorry, I may not answer your question of the cultural appropriation, but and also soft power, but I think I believe in cultural exchange is to building more understanding, especially in the difficult times. Also I remember a friend of mine at Chinese CCTV once said, he has a son who likes to wear, sunglasses. And when you always wear sunglasses, even if it's a sunny day, all you can see is darkness. Let alone it's a stormy day, it's even darker. So I think art, should play we should play a different, role in there to encourage people to understand more of other culture and then to appreciate other culture.
Thank you, Yin Cao. Yes, it's a very good comment about letting the light in on each other's culture and exposing each other's culture to the light, and the permanency of cultural exchange compared with the transitory nature of governments and political circumstances. I'm just reflecting on the Malcolm Fraser quote, which was excellent, and I can hear the excellent wordsmanship of our former ambassador to China at that time, our good friend, Dr. Stephen Fitzgerald. But I'm glad the Prime Minister said those words. Look, I'm mindful of time, and I invite participants to submit questions. I have one question to each of you. It's a different, I've formulated it a bit differently, but it deals with the same theme. I think many people on this call will be very interested in your perspectives. And that's on migration and the diaspora and cultural exchange and interplay. Professor Young, how does the Chinese cultural diplomacy and the diaspora, not only in Australia, but of course it's a very important place, Australia, for Chinese diaspora, how do they interact with each other? And particularly in the context of what we see as increasing xenophobia in Australia, partly driven by the diplomatic tensions that are currently there.
There are many different Chinese Australian communities. So the Chinese diaspora in Australia is very diverse, and I think it's I haven't done the research on this, but how they respond to official cultural diplomacy from China, I think it quite be diverse as well. And some diasporic Chinese might feel attracted to kind of like the pull from China, while others might not. And some might seek a sense of Chinese belonging through ancient Chinese culture, for example, while others may reject what they see as the heavy-handed efforts by China to draw them into the Chinese national fold. So I would say that many Chinese Australians may feel Chinese, but not necessarily in the way in which it is defined by the CCP. So I think we should really be quite cautious in thinking that the official cultural diplomacy or soft power pull by China is successful amongst the diaspora. That might not necessarily be the case. There is a much greater active response to what it means to be Chinese these days. And it is, of course, a very difficult time for people of Chinese backgrounds to live in Australia. That's definitely the case.
Yes.
But we I think, have to be careful to have a very kind of linear ways of thinking about that relationship with China.
It's very dynamic, I agree.
Exactly.
Just with an eye to the time, I'm sorry to be sort of hurrying people along a bit. Guan Wei, could you just very briefly say to what extent, if any, living in Australia changed your perceptions of China as you expressed it through your art? Do you view artistically China differently from your 30 years of being in Australia, to simplify it? You're on mute. Guan Wei, take off mute. Guan Wei, you're still on mute. Mute. Go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a microphone, green microphone.
Okay, yeah, no.
I know it's very hard, Guan Wei.
Now you can hear me. Yeah, I think I had a lot of the change in the sense, I came to the Australians. And but in the 2008, since I come back to China, now I travel in both countries, Australia and China. And yeah, I feel it's very interesting. Sometimes like Australian, because also my half of the life, in Australia, and another 30 years in China. And sometimes, I don't know, I'm the Chinese Australians, and I think are quite like internationally people, And I think this situation, not only myself, many artists, they both live in 2 countries or maybe 3 countries. And I think we be, beyond this, the local limited or some things, I think we feel we're concerned about all of the human beings and some things. And doesn't matter you is a Chinese or Australian. I think maybe you're just the globalization, the people. I think this is very important for myself now.
Good, thanks. And look, last question I really have, because I would invite people now to send in any questions. We'll go into Q&A. I don't actually think there's any have come in as yet, if I'm looking at the right place. So just do your questions on the via chat on your screen, and we'll be happy to take them in the 9 minutes or so that remain. But whilst we're waiting, and to finish off with Yin Cao, we have this fabulous exhibition at the New South Wales Gallery, In One Drop of Water. And I'd really like to know what you're trying to achieve with that. It deals with themes of migration, obviously. But what were the real outcomes you're hoping, or the impressions you were hoping people would leave that exhibition with?
I have to apologize, because this In One Drop of Water is I'm not the curator. I didn't, it's my colleague Natalie sees did a wonderful exhibition. But I think as a viewer, I just feel when I'm going through, I myself is a migrant, like coming to Australia for 15 years coming up. I just feel like it talks about this very urgent, very tough issues through art. It's so beautiful, like for example, the work in Desmond, like Indian, British Indian an artist. It was so beautiful, like if you instead stand in front of it, you just can't, help, feeling the stress, the migrants, like at the bottom of the painting can go through, And then when I look at the painting, which combines like Chinese elements in it, he actually painted 4 traditional Chinese symbols of directions, dragon, tiger, turtles, and vermilion. And I just feel like that is on the bottom, you have this current suffering of people, but with through art you can also see hope, see beauty in art. That's, I think, what art does. I mean, I'd like to also throw in a very probably a very rude quote here. It's it's spoken by the character in a novel by Peruvian writer Mario Vargas Llosa, and who was a 2010 Nobel Prize in Literature. He said something always sticks in my mind. Here I quote, sorry for the language: "Life is a shitstorm in which art is our only umbrella." So I think that is so humorously, but also so true. Umbrella can, protect us from storms, also from sun burning. But it is so beautifully put it. I mean, I think art is a very important, plays an important role in how to say, elevate people's souls and spirit. You are You're mute. You're still muted. Can't hear you.
I'm catching up from Guan Wei. Look, thank you. That's fascinating, and I'm just conscious of the time. So we've got a couple of questions. Several go to the theme that clearly has caught a lot of attention. Professor Ang's distinction between cultural diplomacy and soft power. And some of the questions that have come up on it, for example, should official galleries, for example, say like the New South Wales Gallery, should it in some way formally separate itself from soft power and soft power activities? And related to that, does cultural diplomacy, in the way it's recently been championed as an instrument of soft power, work to heighten the diversity of the thought space of diaspora, or does it cement the position? So the questions are a bit related. One's from Sarah May, one's from Saskia Gilmore. Thank you very much for those questions. Essentially to you, Professor Ang, and one is about should institutions like, say, the gallery try and separate themselves from government efforts of soft power. And another very interesting question, I think, aspect of that is, is there a risk of cultural diplomacy hardening the distinction between people rather than bringing people together?
Interesting. I'm glad that that distinction between cultural diplomacy and soft power has struck a chord. And I think the examples that Jin has given about what the Art Gallery of New South Wales has been doing already makes it quite clear that you know, kind of a lot of cultural exchange activity really is not just taking place with soft power or the national interest in mind. It really goes beyond the national interest. And I think that's the important thing, that we do these kinds of things, exchanges, either large scale or small scale, to explore and to learn and to find ways of connecting with others in ways that are consequential. I think that's important, that we think that we will change through our connections with other cultures and other people, and that kind of dialogue and trialogue or a multilogue, I think has to go beyond the national interest. And I think in that sense, of course, governments play a role in funding activity and things like that, but the activities themselves can be much more dynamic and diverse and exploratory. Certainly, I think large organizations such as the Art Gallery of New South Wales, they do much more than just diplomacy in that soft power sense. Yeah, so, and then I think a lot of the questions were suggesting about the role of the diasporas, I guess. Well, you know, the diasporas are very diverse and heterogeneous, and it's really that work, that people-to-people contact on the ground that we have here in Australia that makes this area so dynamic.
Well, thanks, Professor Yang. We're going to finish up now. There's a very good question from our director, Michael Brand, and we almost have to raise it, but I'm joking. But it's too big and too good a question to be dealt with in the time that remains. But what I'd like to do in the time that remains, invite each of our panelists to, in 30 or 45 seconds, just say briefly what Chinese New Year means to you this year. Cutting off with Guan Wei.
Happy New Year, and yeah, 春节快乐，牛年大吉，牛年大吉。
And what does it mean to you in cultural sense, in cultural terms?
Culture 是什么意思？
新年对你来说是什么？
Yeah, I think this everything is good things to be happened. I think.
Okay. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but anyway. Professor Ang?
Well, there's an interesting thing about the Chinese New Year, because I come from a very westernized Chinese Indonesian family. So we actually never celebrated Chinese New Year. And I came to Australia about 30 years ago. And it's only since then that I've actually been meeting a lot of Chinese people, friends and things like that, that I've started celebrating it a little bit, but I'm totally ignorant about the tradition. So it's something new for me still.
Okay.
Yeah.
The last word, please.
Me?
Quickly, yes, please.
Yes, as a ox, new, to me is a symbol of wisdom, diligence, and benevolence. And I hope, for this year, wisdom can prevent me from being manipulated and, used all right. And the diligence will continue to do the work, I'm doing, and I'm really enjoying it. And also to be more sympathetic and empathetic to people who are less fortunate than me.
Well, thank you. I think they're wise and profound words that states as well as individuals, could take to heart. Could I thank all the panelists? It's been a wonderful session. We've had a lot of comments just congratulating us on the session. Could I thank the Asia Society through Philip Ivanov for supporting this event. I look forward to further collaboration between the Asia Society and VisAsia. And to everyone, 新年快乐. Bye-bye.
新年快乐，拜拜。
新年快乐，拜拜。